We can't get caught because we don't release sales numbers. That was CEO Josh Fairhurst's justification for secretly reprinting limited edition games, directly contradicting his company's name and core promise to customers. Night Trap, marketed as a one-time only collector's item, was reportedly reprinted multiple times with identical packaging, deliberately maintaining the illusion of scarcity while increasing supply and profits. Betrayal has a paper trail. What began as an investigation into limited run games' quality control issues erupted into something far more disturbing when the floodgates opened. Former employees, afraid to speak for years, risked their careers to expose what's happening behind the closed doors of a company operating like a cult, where questioning leadership could end your career and where money is money justified partnerships with human rights abusers. I'm not here with rumors or speculation. Everything you're about to hear comes from verified sources who worked inside limited run games. People who provided internal documentation, financial records, and consistent and cross-referenced accounts that reveal 3 interconnected systems of abuse. A toxic workplace where executives screamed at employees until they shook with fear, where HR complaints were weaponized against those who filed them, and where loyalty to Josh was valued above competence or ethics. Financial improprieties that range from Josh secretly paying himself double without board approval to converting company credit card rewards into Coach gift cards for personal profit, all while employees struggled to receive promised raises. And perhaps most damning, the systematic deception of customers who believed they were supporting game preservation, only to discover they were funding what one insider described as professional scalping institutionalized into corporate form. I want to be clear, I'm not a drama tuber with a vendetta against limited run games. I've never even purchased their products. No, the evidence accumulated over years from former employees, industry partners who have pulled me aside in events, and strangers who leaned in at gaming conventions to offer insider context have painted a disturbing picture beyond shipping delays. This video isn't just about one company's failures. This is about what happens when a business built on preserving gaming history betrays the very values it claims to champion, and the real human cost of that betrayal. This is the darker truth about limited run games. The most public betrayal was saved for those who trusted limited run the most: its customers. The company's most visible deceptions targeted the very collectors whose passion fueled its success. The preservation mission that customers believed they were supporting masked a business model built on systematic deception, where what appeared on the website and what arrived in the mail were often entirely different things. Sources familiar with the company's operations revealed that limited run games' claim of producing strictly limited quantities of physical releases was undermined by internal practices, particularly in the case of Night Trap for PlayStation 4. According to those with direct knowledge of production decisions, Night Trap was allegedly reprinted multiple times despite marketing that suggested a one-time only release. While the first printing was prominently labeled as a limited run, subsequent production runs reportedly maintained identical packaging without any indication they were reprints, creating the appearance of scarcity while actually increasing supply. This practice was particularly notable because Night Trap was one of the company's earliest and most prominent releases, helping establish the brand's identity as a producer of limited collector's items. The game's historical significance as a controversial title that influenced the creation of video game rating systems made it particularly appealing to collectors, who believed they were purchasing a genuinely limited product. Sources indicated that the decision to reprint without disclosure was deliberate rather than an oversight. The apparent conclusion was that maintaining the perception of scarcity would be more beneficial to the company's image and business model than transparency about actual production numbers. Josh reportedly stated that they couldn't get caught because they didn't release sales numbers, and the game had sold so well that no one would ever notice reprints. This approach reportedly created tension within the company, with some team members expressing concern that the practice undermined the fundamental promise implied in the company's name. However, the financial success of the strategy, with collectors continuing to pay premium prices for what they believed were limited products, apparently reinforced the decision to continue the practice with other releases. The 3DO D the Collector's Edition release stands as perhaps the most egregious example of customer deception at limited run games, but former employees revealed this wasn't an isolated incident or oversight. What makes this situation particularly troubling is that the use of CDRs instead of properly pressed discs wasn't a new concept that caught leadership by surprise. It was a possibility that had been explicitly discussed years earlier. Multiple sources confirmed that long before the 3DO release, Josh and other executives had specifically discussed using CDRs as a cost-saving measure. This wasn't something that came up for the first time due to manufacturing delays, explained one former product manager with direct knowledge of these earlier conversations. The idea of using CDRs instead of pressed discs had been floated years before and explicitly rejected at that time because of concerns about quality and customer expectations. During those earlier discussions, team members had raised specific concerns about the fundamental difference between CDRs and pressed discs, particularly regarding longevity, durability, and appearance. One source recalled a specific conversation where the shorter lifespan of CDRs was explicitly discussed in the context of LRG's preservation-focused marketing. We had this whole conversation about how using CDRs would completely undermine our claim of preserving games for future generations, the source explained. Everyone understood that CDRs are temporary media. They're not archival quality. That's why the idea was rejected initially. What makes the 3DO situation particularly damning is that email correspondence from April 2023 shows Josh was directly engaging with the BioFury developer who explicitly mentioned testing his game using CDRs on real hardware. This directly contradicts LRG's later public statement claiming they found quality and reliability issues when attempting to press 3DO discs, and only discovered compatibility problems after shipping to customers. The developer's detailed testing documentation describing both CDR and ODE, optical drive emulator testing, demonstrates that LRG leadership was fully aware of the testing methods and media types used for 3DO games long before manufacturing began. When manufacturing partners later proposed using CDRs to meet the announced release deadline, Josh allegedly approved the substitution despite having previously acknowledged these fundamental quality differences. Most troubling was the deliberate decision not to inform customers of this substitution. There was a specific moment where someone asked if we should notify customers about the change before shipping, one former quality control specialist recalled. The decision was made not to say anything and hope people wouldn't notice or care. When customers did eventually notice, identifying the distinctive appearance of CDRs compared to press media, the company's initial response was to deny or downplay the issue. Only after substantial evidence mounted and the public pressure intensified did LRG acknowledge the substitution and offer replacements. Even then, sources describe how the internal focus remained on damage control rather than addressing the ethical breach. The conversation wasn't, we need to make this right because we misled customers. It was, how do we make this PR problem go away with minimal cost? One former team member explained. This pattern, where a quality compromise was knowingly approved, information was deliberately withheld from customers, and remedies were only offered after public exposure, suggests the CDR situation wasn't an anomaly, but rather a manifestation of a deeper approach to customer relationships. The fact that the specific limitations of CDRs had been previously discussed and acknowledged makes the decision to use them without disclosure particularly difficult to attribute to oversight or misunderstanding, as their public apology attempted to do. As one source who was present for the decision summarized, this was a case where everyone involved knew exactly what they were doing. The hope was simply that customers wouldn't notice or care enough to make it an issue. This calculated risk with customer trust reveals how far the company had strayed from its stated commitment to game preservation and collector respect. By the time of the CDR controversy, the transformation was complete. A company founded on creating lasting physical artifacts was now knowingly shipping products with limited lifespans, the antithesis of preservation. The internal justification that most customers will never even play these games anyway reveals how thoroughly profit had supplanted preservation. The physical object was now merely a collectible to be shelved, not a genuine archival product. Beyond the high-profile examples already discussed, further employees described a systematic pattern of shipping products with known quality issues based on what had become the company's unofficial internal mantra: "It's good enough." Multiple sources confirmed that legitimate quality concerns raised before shipping would frequently be dismissed with this phrase, creating a culture where compromise standards became the norm rather than the exception. There was this sense that as long as the product wasn't catastrophically bad, we could ship it and deal with complaints later, one former employee explained. The threshold for what constituted good enough kept getting lower over time. This attitude manifested in various product issues, from printing errors and misaligned artwork to more substantive problems with game functionality or missing features. While some level of manufacturing variation is normal in physical products, sources indicated that known issues that could have been fixed before shipping were routinely allowed to proceed rather than delay releases or incur additional costs. When you add in the fact that the only person who could review or approve anything was Josh, and he was unapproachable to the average employee, it created a situation where lower quality products were not only common but inevitable. This bottleneck in the approval process meant that legitimate quality concerns often went unaddressed, simply because they couldn't reach the decision maker or because raising such issues was seen as creating unnecessary delays. When quality issues did result in customer complaints, the company allegedly implemented policies specifically designed to minimize the number of replacements rather than genuinely address problems. Multiple sources described how LRG required customers to ship defective products back at their own expense before replacements would be sent, an unusual practice in the industry that created significant barriers for those seeking remedies. It was explicitly discussed as a way to reduce replacement requests, one former manager familiar with these policies confirmed. The thinking was that if we make it onerous enough, only the most determined customers would actually go through with it. This approach extended to financial penalties as well. The company reportedly charged a 15% restocking fee even for products that hadn't yet shipped, most specifically regarding the Sol Cresta release. This practice essentially penalized customers for canceling orders before the company had incurred any shipping costs or processed physical products, a policy that prioritized revenue retention over customer satisfaction. These policies reveal a fundamental contradiction between the company's public image as a customer-focused preservation specialist and its internal approach to customer service. While marketing emphasized the collector experience and product quality, internal policies were specifically designed to minimize accountability when those promises weren't fulfilled. Several sources expressed significant skepticism about the company's public statements regarding what happened to returned or damaged products. LRG support said that damaged games are repackaged and donated to children's hospitals, one former representative noted, referring to official communications to customers. But I never saw any evidence this actually happened. Sources described how this claim was used to create a positive impression with customers concerned about waste or wondering what happened to returned products, despite little apparent verification that such donations were actually occurring. Former employees with direct knowledge of warehouse operations and returns processing indicated that there was no formal system in place to track, organize, or prepare such donations. Multiple sources who worked at the company for years stated they had never witnessed or participated in any substantial donation process, despite being in positions where they would have been aware of such activities. One source who had worked closely with customer service operations for several years noted that the children's hospital donation claim became a standard response to customer inquiries about returns, with customer service representatives instructed to use this explanation. However, This same source indicated that they had never seen documentation or photos of any such donations, nor were they aware of any specific children's hospitals with which the company had established relationships. Another source noted that returned or damaged products were often held in a designated area of the warehouse, but the ultimate disposition of these items remained unclear. While not ruling out that some donations may have occurred, this source emphasized that the volume of items they observed in the returns section did not appear to diminish in a way consistent with regular charitable donations. Further, LRG would eventually stop saying returns and damaged goods were donated at all, instead saying that they would be repackaged and sold at conventions and at LRG's eventual physical store, a significant shift in the narrative that received little public acknowledgement. LRG's approach to purchase limits revealed another troubling dynamic regarding customer treatment. The company maintained a 2 per customer policy for most releases, which sources confirmed was known internally to primarily benefit scalpers rather than genuine fans or collectors. There were many internal discussions about how the 2 per customer limit was essentially optimized for scalping. One former team member familiar with these discussions explained, "1 copy to keep, 1 copy to sell. We knew dedicated fans wanted just 1 copy while scalpers wanted the second, but the policy never changed because quick sellouts looked good for PR." This policy persisted despite recognition that it harmed the very collectors and preservationists the company claimed to serve, because artificially constrained supply, whether through actual manufacturing limits or purchasing policies that enabled scalping, created the appearance of greater demand and allowed for faster sellouts that could be publicized. The deliberate maintenance of a policy known to benefit scalpers directly contradicted the company's public positioning as a champion for game collectors and preservation enthusiasts. This represents another example of how business practices were often at odds with the values the company claimed to uphold. Sources described a particularly troubling proposal that, while ultimately not implemented, reveals the mindset behind some customer-facing decisions. Josh allegedly proposed a Willy Wonka-style golden ticket promotion, where only a small number of customers would receive a promised special item, such as a golden ticket worth some amount of free LRG merchandise or even money. The idea was that we would advertise this special item as part of a collector's edition, but only include it in some of the orders, explained one former marketing team member familiar with the proposal. The rest would get a note saying, "Sorry, you didn't win the golden ticket," or something similar. What made this proposal especially concerning was Josh's apparent justification. According to multiple sources, he specifically stated, "We won't have to pay it out because no one will open the games." This calculation reportedly relied on the knowledge that many limited run customers purchase games as sealed collectibles rather than for play, meaning most of the winning tickets would never be discovered, while potentially increasing sales from collectors who would buy several copies to try to win. Multiple team members reportedly objected to this proposal as fundamentally deceptive. The strategy would essentially exploit the collector mindset while knowing that most would likely remain sealed on shelves. According to sources, the idea was ultimately abandoned after these internal objections, but the fact it was seriously considered speaks to a troubling approach to customer communications and a willingness to exploit collector behavior for financial gain. Behind the customer-facing deceptions lay a deeper pattern of financial manipulation. Limited Run's financial practices reveal how unchecked authority evolved beyond workplace dysfunction into potentially actionable misconduct. From questionable property arrangements to diverted company benefits, these weren't isolated incidents, but a pattern of behavior that betrayed not just employees, but business partners and legal standards alike. Limited Run Games' handling of real estate and personal property transactions reveals a pattern of using company resources for apparent personal benefit with questionable business justification. Property records and sources with direct knowledge can confirm a particularly troubling transaction involving Josh's personal residence at 225 Cypress Hill Lane in Holly Springs, North Carolina. The property was originally purchased by Josh in 2014. According to Wake County property tax records, the home was assessed at $248,615 and generated approximately $3,000 in annual property tax obligations. In 2018, after LRG had become successful, Josh sold this personal residence to Limited Run Games for approximately $250,000, providing himself with substantial liquid cash while transferring both the mortgage and tax obligations to the company. What followed was a complex series of interrelated transactions. LRG, now the official owner, established a rental arrangement with Mighty Rabbit Studios, Josh's original game development company. Documentation shows that Mighty Rabbit was officially listed as using the property for, quote, business purposes, despite it being a residential home in a residential neighborhood, and despite Mighty Rabbit being by all accounts defunct at this time. Corporate records reveal that Mighty Rabbit's business license had actually lapsed, but was retroactively reinstated in 2019 specifically to facilitate this property arrangement. Adding another layer, Mighty Rabbit Studios then reportedly subleased the property to another employee, creating a circular flow of payments that ultimately benefited Josh while being processed through company accounts. Property tax records show that during this period, both Limited Run Games and Mighty Rabbit Studios were paying separate tax bills on the same property. The timing of these transactions raises additional questions. Multiple sources indicate that Josh initiated the sale of his home to LRG precisely when he was in the process of upgrading to a significantly larger personal residence, suggesting the arrangement may have been designed to finance this personal lifestyle improvement through company resources. This created a circular flow of funds. Josh sold to LRG, LRG rented to Mighty Rabbit, and Mighty Rabbit paid rent back to LRG. The property records don't indicate any clear business justification for why LRG needed to own this specific residential property. Not only is there no clear, legitimate business purpose for LRG to purchase an employee's personal residence, but the circular nature of the transaction suggests this may have been structured as a form of off-the-books compensation. According to sources, this happened without formal corporate approval. There was no board meeting. It was simply announced that LRG was buying Josh's house. This transaction appears to have primarily benefited Josh personally by allowing him to purchase another home rather than serving any legitimate business need. This wasn't an isolated incident. Sources confirmed that Ben Moore similarly sold his personal vehicle to LRG without clear business justification. Ben's car became a company car overnight with no actual change in how it was used, one former executive noted. It was just a way to get the company to buy him a car. What makes these transactions particularly troubling from a corporate governance perspective is the apparent lack of proper board oversight. Sources with knowledge of LRG's governance processes indicated these significant asset purchases were never properly presented to or approved by the board as required for related party transactions. Instead, they appear to be executed as executive decisions, despite the clear personal benefit and potential conflicts of interest they represented. The house scheme didn't just represent a blurring of personal and company finances, it symbolized a fundamental shift in priorities. While publicly championing game preservation, Limited Run was simultaneously diverting resources away from quality control investments and towards arrangements that primarily benefited executives. The company that claimed to be saving gaming history was now more focused on saving on personal mortgage payments. Beyond property transactions, sources described other mechanisms through which company resources were allegedly converted to personal benefit. Particularly notable was how corporate credit card rewards programs became sources of personal enrichment for certain executives. Sources with direct knowledge described how the significant purchasing volume generated by LRG's operations, including manufacturing costs, shipping expenses, and operational expenditures, created substantial reward points on company credit cards. Rather than these rewards being used for business purposes or tracked as company assets, they they were allegedly treated as personal perquisites by those controlling the accounts. One specific practice described by multiple sources involved Josh and the conversion of credit card reward points into Coach gift cards, which were then either used for personal purchases or resold for cash. This effectively diverted value generated through legitimate business expenses away from the company and into personal accounts. He used the company card rewards to buy and sell Coach gift cards for money to keep for himself, explained a former employee with knowledge of the practice. No one else was able to benefit from these things. While the law on credit card rewards is somewhat murky, this practice represented a clear fiduciary breach, using company-generated resources for personal enrichment in ways that weren't transparent to other stakeholders or properly accounted for in financial records. The Coach gift card scheme continued for an extended period, with rewards from substantial company expenditures being systematically converted to personal gain rather than being used for company purposes or shared among the team. This pattern of behavior was particularly concerning because it represented yet another channel through which company resources were redirected to serve Josh's personal interests. The Ghost Kickstarter project reveals a pattern of poor financial decision-making followed by escalating commitments to protect initial investments. According to sources, this project began as a promising horror FMV game with impressive credentials. It was pitched by Jed Shepard, a filmmaker who had written and produced the movie Host, along with a partner from a company called Visible Games who would handle development. It was going to be a new FMV game, a horror game where they were going to have the Jim Henson Creature Shop make the monster, explained a former employee who was directly involved with the project. It was like this whole crazy thing. Everything sounded amazing, but it quickly became problematic. When the Kickstarter campaign began struggling, Limited Run Games invested additional money to help it reach its funding goal. However, problems quickly emerged with the Hollywood filmmaker behind the project. After about a year, it turns out this Hollywood guy is a Hollywood guy and doesn't know how money works, explained a former employee directly involved with the project. He spent way too much money on things that he probably should have negotiated on or paid less for. When the filmmaker returned requesting additional funding, Josh's response was, "What the fuck happened to the other money?" Despite this frustration, the company faced a difficult choice: either write off the initial investment entirely or commit more resources to a troubled project. This pattern, initial poor financial decisions leading to further problematic investments to protect the original expenditure, appeared repeatedly in the company's operations. The Ghost project exemplified how emotional investment in exciting ideas often trumped sound financial analysis, creating a cycle that drained resources from more viable projects and ultimately harmed the company's financial health. The guy paid everybody that worked on it way more than he should have and clearly didn't budget it properly, the source continued. But now he has a producer that's come in and is putting a tighter grip on the financials. Rather than simply cutting ties with the project, which would have meant writing off the initial investment, creative solutions were proposed to salvage something from the situation. One employee suggested an approach similar to filmmaker Kevin Smith's solution when he lost original film footage. Let's do what Kevin Smith did when he did his film project. They lost the original film, so they made a film about how the film was lost. The proposal was to release a partial game that would incorporate the completed elements while turning the unfinished portions into a meta-narrative about development challenges. This approach would have allowed LRG to recoup some of its costs. Ultimately, this whole Ghost situation highlights how Josh operated on his own personal interests and desires, often without any sort of attachment to proper business planning or sound investments. After the Embracer Group acquisition, sources described how Josh's approach shifted to maintaining an inflated perception of the company's value, creating new pressures on employees and potentially misleading the parent company about LRG's actual performance and condition. Sources confirmed that Josh would openly acknowledge to trusted staff members that Embracer had likely overpaid for the company, while simultaneously expressing anxiety about not letting Lars down. referring to Lars Wingefer's Embracer's CEO. This created a troubling dynamic where maintaining appearances took precedence over addressing fundamental business issues. The acquisition period coincided with what insiders described as Josh's increasingly erratic management style. Sources noted that Josh would sometimes admit to being checked out during certain periods, particularly when stressful deadlines loomed, yet would still expect employees to maintain a facade of peak performance for Embracer's benefit. This contradiction between Josh's acknowledged disengagement and the pressure he placed on others created significant tension within the organization. One former executive described being constantly on the phone with Embracer representatives, feeling stripped of autonomy as operations became increasingly focused on impressing the parent company rather than addressing actual business challenges. The pressure to justify the acquisition price led to resources being directed towards projects that would look impressive to Embracer leadership instead of improving quality control, addressing customer service issues, or enhancing operational efficiency. The relationship with Embracer created complex dynamics within the company. Embracer representatives would often try to work through internal allies to influence Josh's decisions, creating awkward situations where employees were caught between their loyalty to their direct supervisor and the demands of the parent company. This indirect management approach further complicated an already dysfunctional organizational structure. This post-acquisition period revealed how the questionable practices that had developed during LRG's independent phase continued and evolved under new ownership, potentially misleading not just customers and partners, but now also the parent company that had invested significantly in acquiring the business. LRG's international shipping practices raised significant legal concerns regarding compliance with customs regulations across multiple countries. Former employees with direct knowledge of the company's shipping operations described a pattern of deliberately understating the value of products on customs declarations when shipping to international customers. This wasn't occasional or accidental, according to multiple sources. The practice was described as an explicit policy designed to reduce import duties and taxes that would otherwise be paid by international customers. By marking packages as gifts or declaring values significantly below actual retail prices, LRG systematically reduced customs charges that would typically be assessed on commercial shipments crossing international borders. "We were specifically told to undervalue international shipments," explained one former shipping department employee. "It wasn't presented as maybe you should or if you think it's appropriate. It was a direct instruction." This practice created potential legal exposure for both LRG and its customers. In many jurisdictions, deliberately understating import values constitutes custom fraud, which can result in penalties, seizure of goods, and even criminal charges in extreme cases. Customers receiving these undervalued shipments could find themselves unwittingly implicated in customs violations if authorities questioned the declared values. This wasn't merely a theoretical risk. According to sources, U.S. customs authorities apparently recognized these discrepancies and initiated an investigation into LRG's shipping practices, though the ultimate outcome of this inquiry remains unclear. This approach may have provided LRG a competitive advantage in international markets by effectively subsidizing part of the import cost, but it did so through potentially unlawful means. Sources indicated the practice continued for an extended period and affected a substantial volume of international shipments, suggesting systematic circumvention of customs requirements across multiple countries, a pattern consistent with the company's approach to regulatory compliance in other areas. Multiple sources with direct knowledge confirmed that during a 2023 industry event, Josh tested positive for COVID-19, yet continued attending in-person meetings with major industry partners without disclosing his infectious status. Multiple people advised against his attendance, one former executive recounted, but he decided that a meeting with Sega that he thought no one else could do was more important than people's health. He was told not to come, and then he ended up coming anyway because of this meeting that he thought no one else could handle. The situation extended beyond the Sega meeting. Sources confirmed that Josh also met with executives from Konami while COVID positive, telling them he had just got over COVID and was not infectious anymore, despite still testing positive on rapid tests. The reckless behavior began before the meetings even took place. Josh regularly would share hotel rooms with employees to lower costs, and he did the same thing this time. When the employee expressed concern about sharing accommodations with someone testing positive for COVID, Josh reportedly resisted changing arrangements and dismissed the employee's discomfort. Only after considerable pushback did he reluctantly agree to arrange his own room, though he still insisted on attending the meetings despite his COVID-positive status. Josh's approach to protective measures during meetings revealed a calculated effort to conceal his COVID status. He wore a mask in the meetings and then would take it off, one source explained. He'd tell people, "I just got over COVID," while deliberately hiding that he was still testing positive. Employees who witnessed this behavior noted, "What could I do? I couldn't just interrupt a business meeting to expose that he was lying." This deliberate misrepresentation put partners, colleagues, and potentially their families at risk for what appeared to be nothing more than convenience and a desire not to reschedule meetings. One source summarized the situation. "Everyone said don't come, and then he told everyone he felt good enough to come, and they said okay. Like Ben and another executive were like, well, I guess go ahead, but just stay away from people. He showed up like a day later than the rest of us." The COVID incident exemplified how leadership's behavior at LRG was unconstrained by normal professional standards, ethical considerations, or even basic health protocols designed to protect others, a pattern that extended throughout the organization's operations and relationships. Josh's approach to industry partnerships revealed a pattern of behavior that sources described as deliberately undermining potential valuable relationships, often due to personal grudges or perceived slights. The relationship with IM8bit, a competitor in the physical game space, became particularly toxic, with substantial business consequences that rippled throughout the company's partnership for years. Sources trace this conflict to a specific incident involving the physical release of Rez. When he started Limited Run, Josh was actually a fan of IM8bit, one former team member explained, but then he found out they were trying to do Rez. "We were originally in talks to do the physical release. We showed the developers how to do the entire process, and then at the last minute they said, we're going to go work with IM8bit because, John's our friend and he's offering us a deal." Josh felt completely betrayed when they took all the information we'd given them on how to do the physical and basically handed it to John. Rather than treating this as normal business competition, Josh reportedly took it as a personal betrayal and began what sources described as a vendetta against IM8bit and its co-founder, John Gibson. This animosity quickly became public. One source recalled attending the PlayStation Experience event in 2016, shortly after IM8bit's Rez release. "I went up to John and said, 'Hey, congratulations on Rez, I'm really excited.' However, that night, Josh had gone on a Twitter rant because IM8bit had made a mistake on Rez where they printed one of the covers backwards, and Josh was publicly mocking them, saying, IM8bit should stick to vinyl because they clearly don't know how to print video games." As you might imagine, this created uncomfortable situations for any LRG employees who had attempted to maintain professional relationships. In fact, the source who had said they were excited was now viewed as a liar, if not a spy. This pattern reportedly continued for years, with other LRG team members frequently having to perform damage control after Josh's public criticisms of competitors. The Scott Pilgrim physical release became a particularly contentious example. Reportedly, IM8bit made the grievous insult to Josh of attempting to convince Ubisoft to let IM8bit handle their game's publication. According to sources directly involved, Josh, in response, misrepresented the situation with multiple stakeholders including Ubisoft, Scott Pilgrim creator Brian Lee O'Malley, and NBC Universal. This created significant confusion among all parties as each received contradictory information, threatening to derail that project entirely and reportedly by design. Sources describe a complex battle happening behind the scenes, with Ubisoft reportedly preferring to work with LRG, while Brian and Anamanaguchi favored IM8bit due to personal connections. According to those familiar with the situation, Josh devised a strategy to win over Anamanaguchi by helping them regain vinyl rights and offering unusually favorable financial terms, losing money just to get one over on IM8bit. This approach reportedly succeeded in shifting shifting their support to LRG. The Sea of Stars situation provided another clear demonstration of this pattern. When the developers chose to work with IM8bit for certain aspects of their physical release, Josh reportedly sent hostile communications accusing IM8bit of shady business practices, and the developers of misleading LRG. He claimed IM8bit had engaged in unprofessional tactics regarding the Scott Pilgrim release, and alleged that this had led major publishers to blacklist them, claims that sources with direct knowledge describe as greatly exaggerated. These communications were reportedly so aggressive that other LRG team members had to intervene with damage control, but the developers ultimately decided they no longer wanted to communicate with Josh directly. This feud severely impacted other business relationships as well. Similar issues occurred with Konami, Universal, and other significant partners. Sources described how Josh would circumvent established contacts at publisher partners to advance his preferred narrative, sometimes undermining carefully cultivated business relationships. When confronted about these actions, Josh would reportedly insist his version was the only accurate one, despite contradictory evidence. This pattern extended to manufacturing relationships as well. During a visit to PPM, a facility known for manufacturing Pokemon cards, Josh violated strict confidentiality agreements, nearly costing LRG an important production partnership. Sources indicate that immediately after the facility tour, Josh attempted to post pictures and discuss the experience online, despite having signed explicit NDAs prohibiting such disclosures. The facility reportedly required all visitors to sign confidentiality agreements upon entry, specifically prohibiting photographs or public discussion of what was seen inside. According to sources, Josh's apparent desire to show off his access to uncut Pokemon cards jeopardized the relationship before production had even begun. The situation reportedly became so extreme that Josh fostered what one source described as a cult-like mentality regarding competitors. No one was allowed to like competitors, and anyone who did was basically dead to LRG. This approach severely limited the company's ability to collaborate within the industry and created unnecessary conflicts that damaged potentially valuable relationships. These weren't isolated incidents. Sources describe similar conflicts with numerous indie developers, creating a pattern where personal vendettas appeared to take precedence over business interests. Multiple sources indicated that LRG lost several potential partnership opportunities when Josh's aggressive communications damaged carefully cultivated relationships. The cumulative effect of these behaviors created what sources described as a leadership approach built on fear, division, and manipulation rather than inspiration or shared purpose. This pattern of misrepresentation created tangible business harm, sometimes resulting in lost partnership opportunities and needlessly damaged relationships. For employees, navigating this environment meant constantly weighing professional opportunities against significant personal costs, a dynamic that would manifest in the operational concerns that defined the company's day-to-day functioning. Limited Run Games' approach to COVID-19 relief funds revealed a troubling discrepancy between public statements and private actions. Multiple sources with direct knowledge of the company's finances confirmed that while LRG publicly celebrated its financial strength during the pandemic, it simultaneously applied for and received Paycheck Protection Program (PPP) loans, designed specifically for struggling businesses. The contradiction was particularly stark in Josh's own public statements. On LinkedIn, he explicitly stated that the pandemic has not affected sales of games, and that physical demand has risen considerably during this period. These weren't casual comments, but deliberate public representations of the company's financial condition during COVID-19. Meanwhile, internally, the company was actively pursuing government assistance meant for businesses facing pandemic-related hardship. This wasn't a case of a company seeking assistance during uncertain early pandemic times and then unexpectedly thriving. According to financial records referenced by sources, during this same period when claiming need for government support, LRG increased its employee count from 26 to 32 staff members. More significantly, sources familiar with the company's financial reporting indicated that LRG generated approximately $170 million in revenue during this time frame, a figure that raises serious questions about representations made on PPP loan applications. The PPP loan was supposed to be for companies that were struggling because of COVID, one former team member explained. But Josh was bragging about how much better sales were during the pandemic because people were stuck at home buying more games. It wasn't like we needed that money to make payroll. This suggests the loan funds may not have been justified under the program's requirements for demonstrating financial need. Sources indicated that leadership appeared to view the PPP program not as emergency relief, but as essentially free money available for the taking, regardless of actual need. The funds were obtained at a time when many legitimately struggling small businesses were unable to access PPP support before program funding was exhausted. The apparent contradiction between public statements about financial strength and representations to the PPP program raises significant questions about the accuracy of information provided in the loan application process. Through these various practices spanning financial management, property transactions, custom declarations, reward programs, partner communications, and post-acquisition representations, LRG's leadership appears to have repeatedly blurred the lines between personal and corporate interests. These actions provided significant personal benefits to certain executives while raising serious questions about corporate governance, legal compliance, and fiduciary responsibility. And to understand how, we need to examine the underlying organizational culture that enabled them. Every corporate scandal has its foundation. At Limited Run Games, what began as an ambitious vision for game preservation rotted from within. The toxic workplace culture we're about to explore didn't just harm employees, it created the environment where the financial misconduct and customer deception you've already seen could flourish unchecked, symptoms of a deeper organizational dysfunction. In healthy organizations, feedback and critical thinking drive improvement. At Limited Run Games, however, former employees described a culture where questioning decisions, even when done constructively and with supporting evidence, was met with dismissal, deflection, and sometimes outright hostility. People will figure it out. This dismissive response from Josh perfectly illustrates how Limited Run Games prioritized profit over customer trust. When QA staff discovered the supposedly physical Doom Trilogy release required an internet connection to play, directly contradicting LRG's core preservation mission, they immediately alerted Josh with ample time to address the issue before shipping. Josh doubled down with an even more revealing justification. Most customers won't even play this without an internet connection, so there's even less reason to care. When staff warned this contradicted what customers believed they were purchasing and would trigger backlash, he dismissed these concerns, stating, "Doom has been and will continue to be available on just about every console forever, so it wasn't the end of the world." The most troubling aspect wasn't just the DRM itself, but the deliberate decision to withhold this critical information from customers who had pre-ordered under the assumption they were purchasing a truly physical, preservation-worthy product. This wasn't an oversight, it was a calculated choice to prioritize sales over transparency. Predictably, once shipped, customers discovered the issue, and a PR crisis erupted. In fact, the company's public response avoided acknowledging that leadership had been fully aware of the issue before shipping. Instead, the narrative was reframed to suggest it had been an unfortunate oversight, rather than a conscious decision to withhold material information from customers. Only after enough angry customers and exposing articles were written did Josh reluctantly contact Bethesda, but not before complaining that doing so was jeopardizing the money-making relationship. Former employees were so skeptical of his commitment that many doubted he actually sent the email at all. This pattern, knowingly shipping products with undisclosed limitations, dismissing staff concerns, and addressing issues only after public outcry, became a defining characteristic of how LRG operated beneath its preservation-focused marketing. The insistence on leadership's infallibility extended beyond individual incidents to become a structural element of the company culture. Employees learned that agreeing with leadership, particularly Josh, was valued more highly than accuracy or effectiveness. Those who embraced this approach were rewarded with favor and influence, while those who persisted in pointing out problems or contradictions found themselves marginalized. The company's approach to ethical concerns followed a similar pattern of prioritizing profit over principles. When SNK was purchased by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who has been accused of numerous human rights violations, including the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, an employee raised concerns about continuing to work with them. According to multiple sources, Josh's response was unequivocal. Money is money. One former employee who was present for these discussions recalled the disturbing advice they received. Colleagues insisted that Josh was right, warned they shouldn't be there with their heart on their sleeve, and delivered the shocking statement that all money is blood money. This stance created significant internal tension, with the company's legal counsel eventually siding with those who had ethical concerns. The resolution, however, reveals the company's true priorities. Sources indicate that after key employees who had raised these concerns departed the company, Limited Run quietly resumed its relationship with SNK. This pattern demonstrated how ethical considerations were merely temporary obstacles to be navigated rather than genuine principles to be upheld. Another example of how the company's public image diverged from its internal operations. The sigil situation perfectly illustrates the company's intolerance for questioning leadership. During a snowstorm, staff discovered that a major release for John Romero's game, at the time considered a significant opportunity for the company, had no marketing materials prepared, despite the launch date being thoroughly communicated through multiple channels. I remember it snowed that day and a lot of the office was out due to the weather, one source recalled. Despite these conditions, Shadi El-Haddad, the art director, came in through the blizzard to get the game on the website. Through their emergency workday, staff managed to make the release available for sale. What happened next revealed the true dysfunction. Instead of recognizing this dedication, instead of recognizing the mistake in allowing this game to fall between the cracks, Josh massively chewed out the staff, claiming no one knew the game was even coming out. This was a surprise to everyone, a claim directly contradicted by documentation. When the marketing department pointed out the date was clearly written on their calendar, Josh's response was definitive. It wasn't on his calendar, and only his calendar mattered. While Josh characterized his leadership as calculated, sources describe numerous instances where his behavior was more emotional and impulsive than strategic. He yelled at me for not working enough and told me, "Fuck you," recalled one employee about bringing a problem with an upcoming release to Josh. Another employee documented an incident where Josh berated them for requesting overtime to complete a promised project. Josh is apparently okay with customers being screwed over and didn't want me to even try to figure out how to save the project, and said, "You're the one working on it, so it's your fault." These emotional outbursts created an environment where employees became hesitant to bring problems to leadership's attention, even when those problems directly affected customers. The fear of triggering an impulsive negative reaction effectively suppressed information that could have helped the company address issues before they escalated. Even when Josh wasn't physically present in the office, questioning was actively discouraged. Multiple sources described how Josh would frequently undermine decisions made by others while he was away, particularly when those decisions deviated from his own approach. This created a chilling effect where even those with supposed authority hesitated to make decisions, knowing they might be reversed without discussion or explanation. If it was a decision that needed Josh's approval, it obviously didn't get fixed, one former department head summarized, describing the futility of the decision-making process. The message throughout the organization became crystal clear. Questioning Josh or raising concerns wasn't just discouraged, it could be career-ending. This didn't just harm employees, it directly undermined the company's ability to address problems before they affected customers and partners. In healthy organizations, clear standards of behavior apply to everyone, with transparent accountability mechanisms ensuring fairness. At limited-run games, former employees describe something entirely different. A structure where authority was exercised arbitrarily and the most powerful figures operated without oversight, while maintaining an unquestionable rightness that prevented any challenge to their decisions. This lack of accountability was most visible in documented misconduct. One revealing incident occurred during a new employee's first week. Employee had just moved from New Jersey to join us. Within his first week, he witnessed Ben screaming up and down the hallways, cursing at the top of his lungs. The employee was literally visibly shaking. He was terrified. Despite formal complaints to HR, nothing changed. Ben Moore, LRG's chief financial officer, who followed Josh from his original company Mighty Rabbit Studios, quickly established himself as one of Josh's most trusted lieutenants, despite having no formal qualifications for his executive role. According to sources who worked directly with him, he became one of the most feared figures in the company. Independent sources described Ben's consistent pattern of verbal abuse, storming into employees' offices to scream in their faces and openly telling people they didn't deserve their jobs. One former employee took anxiety medication specifically because of Ben's behavior, while others worked from home just to avoid him. The situation became so severe that staff issued an ultimatum during the Embracer acquisition. They wouldn't sign unless Embracer agreed to fire Ben if his abusive behavior continued. Ben's power was further entrenched by hiring friends from his bar management days without proper vetting. Most of LRG seemed to be people Ben worked with at a bar, one former manager explained. These hires would cause major problems within the company and could never be fired unless they finally lost Ben's trust, creating a network of loyal supporters who owed their position to Ben rather than qualifications. What made Ben's position particularly unassailable was his relationship with Shadi. Multiple sources confirmed that Josh explicitly stated he refused to fire him in case Shadi left too. This created a situation where Ben operated with what one longtime employee called complete immunity, regardless of how his behavior affected other staff members. One source who worked closely with Ben for years summarized, "I hope to never work with someone that much of a loose cannon that just bled toxicity everywhere he went. Unfortunately, for a lot of this, there's documentation and witnesses." When confronted about Ben's behavior, Josh would respond with excuses like, Ben came from managing a bar, so he was more gruff, minimizing clearly unprofessional conduct. When one employee overheard an executive express that they could no longer tolerate Ben's behavior, Josh's response was telling. "Don't make me choose between you." This implied both that such behavior was acceptable and that Josh's personal preferences superseded professional standards. According to multiple sources, even when HR complaints were filed, the response was that unless Ben did something insanely bad, there would be no punishments. The most revealing aspect of this toxic hierarchy was that even Ben wasn't immune to Josh's belittling behavior. He already did this to Ben so much that Ben had a meltdown, explained one source who witnessed their dynamic. This created a power structure where abuse flowed downward. Victims of mistreatment became enforcers of the same behaviors towards others. This pattern reinforced the atmosphere where nearly everyone experienced some form of belittlement or abuse. The shared trauma paradoxically strengthened the dysfunctional system rather than generating resistance, a classic characteristic of organizations where even the lieutenants are both victims and perpetrators. This toxic leadership extended throughout the organization. Robert, another upper-level manager, displayed similar problematic behaviors. Ben and Robert, they loved to micromanage people, just like Josh, and they loved to be involved in every decision, and they loved to yell if you don't pick the decision they wanted, explained a former department head. Though perhaps less directly confrontational than Ben towards some employees, Robert contributed significantly to the toxic hierarchy. Despite his behavior, he remained protected within the company structure, with sources noting that when it came to the rules, it felt like managers got a pass and other people didn't. During interviews, Robert would routinely promise potential employees opportunities for advancement that never materialized. One employee recalled being told during their October 2019 interview that there is room for advancement, a promise that proved entirely false. The pattern extended to mid-level supervisors like Sarah, whose treatment of support staff further exemplified the company's tolerance for abusive management. Multiple employees detailed Sarah's pattern of verbal abuse, including an incident where she reportedly screamed and cursed at her entire team during a work meeting. Behavior witnessed by a visiting parent with HR experience who noted such conduct should be a fireable offense on the spot. When one employee requested a transfer from Sarah's team for medical reasons, Sarah reportedly announced to everyone that this was their final chance, and if they pull anything, they're gone, leading the employee to remark, "I did not realize moving from shipping to customer support based on medical health conditions was considered a bad mark on my end, and that could have had the potential for firing." This immunity from consequences extended to Josh himself, particularly in how he exercised authority over employees' personal lives. Multiple sources described how Josh denied an employee's request for time off on the anniversary of their mother's death, telling them, "You need to get over your mom's death. That was a long time ago, and you have to grow up and get over this stuff." One source explained, "It was like he was always trying to find the most painful button to push." The threat of termination became a powerful tool for enforcing this unchecked authority. Multiple sources described how employees commonly feared being fired for raising concerns, especially about Josh or his inner circle. This created a climate of silence where problems festered rather than being addressed. Beyond this absolute authority, the company operated on the principle that leadership, particularly Josh, was always right, regardless of evidence to the contrary. Quality issues with products received similar treatment to personnel problems. Sources described an internal saying, "It's good enough," that became the default response when employees raised concerns about product standards. Rather than addressing legitimate quality problems, the company culture evolved to normalize substandard work. When customers later complained about these issues, the narrative would shift to blame external factors, suppliers, shipping companies, or the customers themselves, rather than acknowledging internal shortcomings. Taking credit for others' work became another manifestation of this pattern. Multiple sources described how Josh would appropriate ideas, projects, and achievements that originated with other team members. One source explained how successes would be attributed to Josh, while failures were assigned to others, creating a narrative of infallibility around leadership. Even when employees had documented evidence of their contributions, the internal story would be rewritten to center Josh's role. Perhaps most concerning was how these false narratives were maintained even when contradicted by reality. Sources described situations where Josh would create and promote versions of events that teammates knew were factually inaccurate. Yet, challenging these narratives was discouraged. The Sigil timeline was one example. Another involved the Doom Trilogy release, where Josh initially refused to acknowledge the DRM issue despite clear evidence, and later resisted taking responsibility for the decision not to address it before shipping. The company's approach to external criticism followed the same pattern. When customers or industry partners raised concerns, the default response was defensive rather than reflective. Sources described how leadership would craft elaborate justifications for decisions rather than considering whether adjustments might be warranted. Even when issues became public relations problems, the focus remained on controlling the narrative rather than addressing the underlying causes. By maintaining this fiction of infallibility within a structure of absolute authority, the company created an environment where learning from mistakes became nearly impossible. Problems couldn't be solved because their existence couldn't be acknowledged, leading to repeated patterns of the same issues. For employees, the message became clear. Challenging leadership's perspective, no matter how factually justified, was a path to nowhere. This unchecked authority extended beyond operational matters into the company's financial practices, where secrecy became the standard operating procedure. One people manager discovered that Josh was secretly paying himself $14,000 per month, significantly higher than what had been discussed among leadership and roughly double what other executives earned. This discovery wasn't made through any official channel. There was no board meeting, no compensation committee, no transparency. Instead, this executive stumbled upon this information accidentally while reviewing payroll systems to determine appropriate raises for team members. I was checking the system to see how much some of my coworkers were making so I could advocate for their raises, the source explained. This is when they discovered that Josh had been paying himself $14,000 monthly for almost a year. The agreement amongst leadership was that Josh would be paid slightly more than other executives, since he was the CEO. But the understanding was that this meant a few $100 difference, not double the compensation of every other staff member. When confronted about this substantial discrepancy, Josh claimed complete ignorance about his own compensation, insisting he didn't even check his bank account and therefore didn't know he was receiving such a sum. When pressed further, Josh deflected responsibility entirely, claiming that was Ben that did that, despite having received this salary consistently for nearly a year. In 2022, Embracer Group, a large European video game holding company, bought Limited Run Games. Embracer originally contacted Limited Run in 2019 to begin discussing acquisition of the company. When Embracer Group conducted their due diligence, Josh was advised to properly place himself on the Limited Run Games payroll, at which point he instituted this substantial salary without disclosure to other leadership. And it was then that the fact he was paying himself over double what anyone else was paid, and doing so without anyone knowing, was discovered. This arrangement had deeper corporate implications. For background, Limited Run was originally a brand name owned by Mighty Rabbit Studios, Josh's video game development company. LRG was created to sell limited print copies of Mighty Rabbit's games, and later expanded into publishing physical versions of other developers' digital titles. Mighty Rabbit had previously taken a $20,000 investment from a company called Joystick in return for 50% of Mighty Rabbit's future ventures. Sources explain that Josh split LRG into a separate company as quickly as possible, but structured payment of his salary through Mighty Rabbit Studios to avoid paying Joystick their contractual share of revenue. By having Mighty Rabbit pay his salary, the company was basically making no money, and splitting 50% of that was a lot less than if his investors knew they should have had 50% of LRG. By keeping LRG separate while funneling his salary through Mighty Rabbit, Josh effectively ensured profits went to him while costs went to his partners, a pattern of financial maneuvering that would become characteristic of the company's operations. Perhaps most concerning was how company funds were redirected towards Josh's personal collecting habits. Under the guise of research, significant company resources were allocated to Josh's game collection, items that would ultimately remain his personal property rather than company assets. Sources recount Josh specifically telling the company accountants that if something happens to the company, I want to be clear that these games are mine. Reportedly, Josh would buy retro games like Castlevania using company funds. These games would be placed in a locked room that only Josh could access. If staff needed access, for example, to recreate the cover of Castlevania for an upcoming release, they had to ask Josh for permission. Josh would then retrieve the game, scan the cover, and replace the game in his locked collection room. This use of company resources for personal purposes reflected an expectation that the organization existed to serve Josh's needs rather than the reverse. The financial opacity extended to personal expenditures as well. Multiple sources confirmed that Josh routinely had personal packages shipped to the company address specifically to hide his spending habits from his wife. The office became a staging ground for his personal shopping, with one source explaining a lot of times he would say he was coming to the office to do emails, but he really just cleaned his room because he had 8 million boxes in there from ordering stuff. When asked directly why everything came to the office instead of his home, Josh reportedly admitted, "A lot of this comes here so my wife doesn't see how many packages show up." When questioned about whether his wife had access to bank statements, he confirmed, "Yeah, but I use a credit card she doesn't have access to." Limited Run's entire business strategy wasn't created from nothing. It was the deliberate scaling of a proven profit model that Josh had personally refined for years. Sources reveal that Limited Run Games was essentially professional scalping institutionalized into corporate form, with every aspect of the business reflecting this foundation. Before LRG existed, Josh had methodically developed his approach through years of practice. He used to go shop at flea markets, pawn shops, he'd drive all around North Carolina, go on eBay deals, buy games from stores in the UK, and he would buy this stuff to resell, said one source. The transition from individual reselling to corporate strategy was surprisingly direct. "Why are you buying 2 of this?" And he said, "I'm going to keep one sealed to sell later," recalled the source. "And then, once Limited Run started, I realized, oh, now I know why he's doing this." This scalper mentality, artificially constraining supply to drive up perceived value and create fear of missing out, became embedded in every level of company strategy. As one source put it even more bluntly, "He's the customer we pretend we hate, but he is that customer." This wasn't some quirky founder backstory. It was the fundamental operating principle that shaped every aspect of how Limited Run Games interacted with its customers and the gaming community at large. In an organization where even executives couldn't access accurate financial information, the message was clear. Money flows were controlled exclusively by Josh, with no meaningful oversight or accountability. This financial secrecy would become the foundation for a workplace culture where questioning and accountability were systematically discouraged. This was reinforced by an intense demand for loyalty that permeated every aspect of the company culture. In professional organizations, institutional loyalty is distinguished from personal fealty, and career transitions are handled with respect. At Limited Run Games, sources described a fundamentally different approach, one where inappropriate personal loyalty was demanded, surveillance was used as a control tactic, and departure from the company triggered systematic campaigns to damage reputations and careers. Josh's demands for loyalty often manifested in expectations that employees would monitor and report on each other. Sources described how Josh would explicitly ask certain employees to spy on others, specifically instructing people to let him know if anybody else is saying anything when he left the office. This created an atmosphere of surveillance where employees never knew which colleagues might be reporting back to leadership. Sources confirmed that Josh implemented multiple layers of monitoring throughout the organization. In one particularly egregious example, Josh secretly installed webcams, specifically to track certain employees' movements and work habits. This surveillance primarily targeted those who had raised concerns about company practices or whose loyalty Josh questioned. One employee, Chris Cooper, became the subject of particularly intense scrutiny. According to sources, Josh used these cameras to monitor Cooper and also regularly asked other employees to report on Cooper's activity, creating a network of unwilling informants. If Chris wasn't at his desk, Josh would immediately text someone to find out where he was, one source explained. The environment of mistrust deepened as employees realized information shared in supposedly private conversations was somehow reaching leadership. One source described how criticisms expressed in what they believed were confidential discussions would later be referenced by Josh in meetings or one-on-one conversations, making it clear that someone had reported the conversation. This led to employees becoming extremely cautious about expressing any opinions in the workplace. The culture of surveillance extended beyond the office walls through constant digital monitoring. Internal communications were restricted and monitored. with Josh expecting employees to be available on Slack during evenings and weekends. Sources described Josh routinely messaging during off-work hours and expecting an immediate reply, and those who didn't could be expected to explain why they weren't available. The surveillance wasn't limited to the office. Sources described how Josh expected updates on employee activities during business trips and industry events, often asking team members to report on others' networking, meetings, or even social activities after hours. This physical and social surveillance created an environment where employees felt constantly watched, further discouraging any behavior that might challenge established narratives and reinforcing a culture where loyalty was demonstrated through reporting on colleagues. Perhaps most revealing was how Josh responded when loyalty was questioned. Sources described how even mild pushback against inappropriate demands would trigger hostility and accusations of disloyalty. When employees raised concerns about work-life balance, quality issues, or problematic behaviors, these legitimate professional concerns would be reframed as personal betrayals. This personalization extended to business relationships as well. Sources described how Josh would characterize competitors or partners who made decisions counter to his preference as having betrayed him personally, rather than simply making business choices. Of course, the relationship with I Am 8-Bit became particularly contentious, with Josh viewing their business decisions as personal affronts, requiring loyalty-based retaliation rather than strategic responses. This pattern of isolation began within the company itself, where leadership deliberately created divisions between employees who might otherwise form supportive alliances. Multiple sources confirmed that Josh would deliberately pit department heads and managers against each other, creating artificial conflicts that prevented unified perspectives from emerging. These manufactured tensions served to isolate potential leaders from one another, ensuring that any resistance to problematic practices remained fragmented and ineffective. The consistent thread through all these behaviors was the absolute refusal to acknowledge that there could ever be legitimate reasons to question leadership. Concerns were invariably reframed as either moral failings, professional incompetence, or disloyalty, never as reasonable professional feedback or responses to problematic conditions. By maintaining this fiction, the company created powerful disincentives against speaking up while simultaneously insulating itself from addressing actual issues. The loyalty demanded within LRG was enforced through a comprehensive surveillance system that left employees feeling constantly watched and evaluated. A classic control mechanism found in organizations where members are conditioned to police themselves and others. In healthy organizations, truth emerges through transparent communication and shared information. At limited-run games, former employees described a system where reality itself was carefully controlled, where information was weaponized, fear was cultivated, and Josh positioned himself as the sole arbiter of truth. This control began with the deliberate creation of information silos. Sources described how Josh would selectively share company information, creating artificial barriers between teams and departments that prevented employees from seeing the complete picture. Josh controlled who could talk to whom, one source explained, creating an environment where employees' understanding of events was always filtered through leadership's perspective. This information control served as a power tool. Those with more information had advantages over others, fostering competition rather than collaboration. The physical workplace became a landscape of fear, particularly regarding certain executives. Ben Moore, described by multiple sources as prone to explosive outbursts, created such an atmosphere of intimidation that employees warned new hires about his behavior. People warned other employees, "Ben is a monster. Don't make him mad," one source recounted. The fear was so pervasive that employees developed and shared strategies to avoid triggering his anger. Disturbingly, sources describe Josh's habit of collecting embarrassing information about colleagues and industry contacts. Multiple sources confirmed that Josh would latch onto potentially embarrassing details about people, speech patterns, mistakes, personal struggles, and use these to shape narratives about them. The practice served a dual purpose. It provided leverage in disagreements and discouraged people from challenging Josh's version of events out of fear their own embarrassing moments might become public. Educational background became a powerful tool for creating divisions within the company. Sources described how Josh and Ben would invoke educational credentials to dismiss valid concerns and isolate those with different backgrounds. For example, employees recall hearing Ben and Josh say things like, "You didn't go to college like us, so no offense, you don't know what you're talking about." Communication styles and language skills were similarly weaponized. Multiple sources described how minor language errors or speech patterns would become subjects of mockery, with Josh leading efforts to ridicule employees' communication. One source described how a simple email with grammatical issues became this whole bigger thing, with leadership making fun of the employee for months. Another recalled Josh publicly mocking their pronunciation of a word, turning a slip into a sadistic ongoing joke used to undermine their credibility. The control extended to how the company handled its own history. According to sources, Josh would regularly rewrite the narrative about past events, particularly when previous decisions led to problems. Despite documentary evidence, Josh's version would always become the accepted truth within the organization. Those who challenged this narrative faced accusations of disloyalty or incompetence, including being gaslit constantly until they would accept that it was actually their fault all along. In fact, nothing was ever done without Josh's explicit direction. Every project had to be personally reviewed by Josh. No staff had authority to finalize anything or make any lasting decisions. Every customer complaint resolution had to be approved if it cost so much as a single dollar. Josh wasn't just the final decision, he was the only decision. This paranoia about external threats extended the company's approach to its market and customers. Sources described how leadership instilled a culture of fear that everyone was scamming them, leading to restrictive customer service policies that treated legitimate complaints with suspicion. Employees were told to assume every single complaint was someone trying to get one over on the company. For example, when customers requested replacements for defective products, the company often required them to return the original at their own expense, a policy both designed to deter replacement seekers rather than address genuine quality issues, and also to make sure that no one was getting anything they didn't pay for. Even legitimate business opportunities were viewed through a lens of suspicion and fear. One source described how potential partnerships with larger companies were approached with wariness rather than optimism, with Josh often finding reasons why such relationships might be problematic rather than beneficial. While these isolation tactics were troubling within the company, the treatment of those who left revealed an even more disturbing pattern. Sources described how Josh would systematically damage the reputations of former employees. When employees would depart, Josh and others reportedly spread false rumors about them, stories that appeared designed specifically to damage professional reputations in the industry. More disturbing was the pattern of creating entirely fictional misconduct allegations after departures. Sources described how Josh would spread rumors about former employees, often with sexual or inappropriate overtones designed to go far beyond normal professional disagreements, venturing into deliberate character assassination. The company's approach to former employees extended to active interference with future opportunities. Multiple sources described how Josh would use his industry connections to undermine former colleagues' professional prospects, reaching out to potential employers or partners to share negative characterizations. One source noted that after they left, they found out that Josh had spent the entire last month of their employment bad-mouthing them to their new employer, all while telling the employee that things were fine. The company culture normalized making up rumors and lies about former employees after departure to such an extent that it appeared in internal discussions about managing departures. Sources described how these fabrications served multiple purposes. They discouraged current employees from staying in contact with former colleagues. They preemptively discredited any criticisms former employees might share about company practices, and they reinforced the narrative that leaving was inherently disloyal. The result was a closed system where reality itself became malleable, defined not by facts or evidence, but by what Josh declared to be true. It was a distortion of reality, where members gradually lose their ability to trust their own perceptions and instead rely on the leader's definition of reality. At Limited Run Games, this reality distortion field created the perfect conditions for both financial misconduct and customer deception to flourish unchecked. In healthy organizations, personal boundaries are respected and institutional mechanisms protect employee well-being. At Limited Run Games, sources described a system where boundaries were systematically violated and institutional controls were weaponized to enforce compliance rather than ensure fairness. This systematic boundary violation began with the company's approach to work-life balance. Multiple sources confirmed that Josh would regularly work on major holidays and then pressure others to do the same, creating implicit expectations that prioritizing family gatherings demonstrated insufficient dedication to the company. "You know I'm going to be here. You should probably be here too," he would tell staff members. While framing this as optional, sources described how Josh would leverage these sacrifices later, repeatedly mentioning that he worked over Christmas or other holidays in the weeks that followed. This public martyrdom established a standard where personal boundaries were viewed as signs of insufficient dedication, rather than normal professional limits. Multiple sources described receiving messages late at night about tasks, while Josh claimed, "I'm not asking you to do this right now, I'm just telling you so that I remember that I've told you to do this." This blurring of work-life boundaries created constant anxiety among staff about missing important communications. Work schedule expectations further undermined personal stability. While enforcing strict office hours for employees, typically 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., sources described how Josh would regularly violate these same boundaries, coming in late, leaving early, or working from home without notice, while still criticizing others for similar flexibility needs, often related to family responsibilities. This double standard created a situation where employees felt unable to meet personal obligations without risking criticism or career consequences. The disregard for family commitments was particularly evident in the company's approach to major life events. When one employee experienced a divorce, Josh's response demonstrated this pattern vividly. Rather than recognizing the significant emotional impact of this major life transition, Josh compared it unfavorably to another employee's breakup, stating, "If she can get over it with a kid, which is way worse than anything you're going through, you can get over it too." This comparative minimization of personal struggles created an environment where legitimate needs for support and adjustment were dismissed. Similar patterns emerged around grief and loss. You've already heard how Josh denied time off for a family member's death anniversary, revealing a pattern where family relationships and personal needs were consistently subordinated to company demands. This treatment of family commitments as obstacles rather than essential parts of employees' lives created a workplace where personal boundaries were systematically eroded. Especially troubling was how human resources, typically a department intended to protect employee well-being, was transformed into a mechanism for control and retaliation. Rather than operating as an independent department with confidential processes, HR at Limited Run Games functioned primarily as an extension of executive authority. The excuse I would get was, "Well, we'll have to talk to Josh about it." One former employee recalled about HR complaints against executives. This lack of confidentiality created a chilling effect where legitimate concerns had no pathway for resolution. Worse, HR reports created records of who raised issues, information that would often be handed to the very managers generating the complaints to later be used against employees who spoke up. Knowing complaints would be directed back to the subjects created a powerful deterrent against reporting workplace issues, effectively silencing dissent through institutional design. Multiple sources described how HR complaints about executive behavior would not only fail to result in meaningful action, but would often lead to increased scrutiny or hostility toward the employee who filed the complaint. This pattern created a situation where the very system designed to protect employees became a mechanism for identifying and targeting those who raised concerns. The weaponization of HR extended to how performance issues were documented and addressed. Sources described how minor infractions by employees who had questioned leadership would receive formal documentation and disciplinary action, while significant misconduct by those in leadership positions or their allies would go unaddressed. This selective enforcement created a two-tiered system where accountability applied only to those without protection from the inner circle. Combined with the atmosphere of surveillance and the necessary caution when communicating with other employees for fear of who might be trying to curry favor by repeating what you said, there was a pervasive paranoia. The resulting isolation, where employees couldn't trust colleagues and had no institutional recourse for grievances, created the perfect conditions for maintaining control. This systematic violation of boundaries and weaponization of institutional mechanisms are hallmarks of organizations where members are gradually separated from external support systems and made dependent on the organization's approval. At limited-run games, this pattern of boundary violation and institutional control created an environment where employees were effectively trapped, unable to address legitimate concerns through proper channels, and afraid to speak up for fear of retaliation, with their entire careers being on the line if they tried to leave. This toxic dynamic not only harmed employees, but created the conditions where financial misconduct and customer deception could flourish unchecked. What emerges from these interconnected issues isn't just a collection of isolated problems, but a comprehensive picture of a company that systematically betrayed the trust of employees, partners, and customers alike. The limited-run games that appeared on collectors' shelves bore little resemblance to the reality behind those carefully designed boxes. The patterns we've explored throughout, information control, reality distortion, boundary violations, and institutional weaponization, are not just workplace dysfunctions. At limited run, it seems power is concentrated, dissent is punished, and members gradually lose their ability to trust their own perceptions. This toxic foundation explains everything we've seen throughout this investigation. The customer deception wasn't just about profit, it emerged from a culture where truth was malleable, and leadership's version of reality couldn't be questioned. The financial improprieties weren't just opportunistic greed, they were enabled by systems where accountability only flowed in one direction, and institutional controls were weaponized rather than enforced. What began as a passion project ostensibly dedicated to physical game preservation gradually transformed into something far more troubling. The evidence presented by multiple sources paints a comprehensive picture of a company where ethical boundaries eroded across every dimension of its operations. The company's internal culture betrayed that mission from within, creating an environment where employees feared speaking up, customers were systematically misled, and financial ethics were subordinated to personal gain. Limited-run games appears to have operated under a fundamental contradiction. While marketing itself as the guardian of gaming history, a company founded by collectors for collectors, internal practices increasingly prioritized profit and control over the very values it claimed to champion. There was this growing pattern of stretching the definition of physical release to its breaking point, one former product manager noted. Some products were basically just a box with a download code, but they were marketed with the same language as fully physical cartridge or disc releases. This disconnect between public image and private reality extended beyond product quality. Financial arrangements that blurred personal and corporate interests, toxic workplace practices that weaponized employees' vulnerabilities, and leadership behavior that prioritized personal vendettas over business relationships all reveal an organization where ethical considerations became increasingly secondary to other motivations, and where preservation became predation. These various issues appear interconnected rather than isolated. The toxic workplace environment enabled customer deception by discouraging internal questioning. Financial improprieties were protected by information control and employee intimidation. Leadership misconduct went unchallenged due to systematic suppression of dissent. For customers who trusted limited run games to deliver on its promises of quality physical products and genuine preservation, for employees who dedicated themselves to what they believed was a mission-driven company, and for business partners who entered relationships in good faith, this pattern of behavior represents a profound breach of trust. What these accounts ultimately reveal is not just a company with problems, but a cautionary tale about how easily stated values can be compromised when accountability fails and success breeds impunity. The limited run that may have mattered most, ethical leadership and business practices, appears to have been the first thing to sell out. Thank you to my patrons for supporting this video, and I'll see you on the next one.